This is Joe Bishop-Henchman, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
Thank you all for tuning in to the Matt Balaker podcast. I'm particularly excited today. We have executive producer and future bridge partner to Ben Roethlisberger, Eric Servone, joining us. How you doing, Eric?
Good to be here, Matt. And I think I'm probably the next best candidate for a Steelers quarterback. They don't really have too many others. So I appreciate that.
You get my vote, but we're in luck today, Eric, because today's guest is fantastic. I think we're all going to be at least 97% smarter by the time we're finished. And we started this podcast with the hopes of having experts on who can explain things simply in a way I can understand, and then the rest of us can free ride off their knowledge. And I think we have a perfect one today, because this gentleman, he's a tax policy advocate with great hair. He fought against the San Diego curfew laws in the late 90s. He has spoken in front of Congress at least 6 times. He's a nonprofit executive who's appeared on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, Politico, and more. He was a ringer on the Carlsbad High School Academic League team. He successfully sued the IRS. He's one of the very few reasons I still log on to Facebook. Make him feel welcome. It's Joseph Bishop-Henchman. How you doing, Joe?
Oh, Matt, that's very generous of you. Good to see you again, and good to see you, Eric.
Good to see you, Joe. And we're saying Joe is wearing a nice suit, which is the DC version of Casual Fridays. So your decorum is off the charts. I'm curious, how did you get into tax policy at such a young age?
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, I guess I've always been kind of, I remember one of the Clinton budgets being printed in the local newspaper in the 1990s when I was a teenager. And me just kind of going through it, and we spend a lot on healthcare programs. We spend a lot on defense and the military, and then not as much on other things. And a lot of people don't even even that, given the state of economic education and media, what the media focuses on. Even I think most people don't even know that much about the federal budget. But it was just kind of interesting to me, and I kind of followed it. And then when I moved to DC in 2004, I started out in transportation policy, and then going to law school and got my law degree. And I had to kind of figure out what I wanted to do with my law degree. And I did a stint at the DC Attorney General's office. And that's probably about as much working for the government that I'm going to do in my lifetime. It was kind of a shambles internally, that office was. And then the Tax Foundation, which was a think tank, was looking for a law student to help write briefs to courts. And so I started there, and then they ended up, the lawyer in charge, they ended up bringing me on full time after I graduated law school. And then the lawyer who ran the program left to become Indiana's budget director. And so I was promoted to head of the program. And then the state program needed an overhaul, and I'd done such a good job with the legal program, they put me in charge of that. So I ran that for a number of years, and then I became COO of the whole organization. And then I did what a lot of people in DC do, is I cashed out to join a large law firm.
Good for you.
I did that for a little bit. And then the pandemic happened, and I just had this vision of the bottom dropping out of every state's budget, every state raising taxes, and passing bad taxes and terrible ideas and high taxes. And I didn't want to. I was getting really antsy, like helping big companies solve their tax issues while that was going to be going on. And luckily, the National Taxpayers Union at the same time was setting up a new legal program for the first time to basically sue on behalf of taxpayers. And I'd been advising them, and I pulled what I described as a Dick Cheney, because kind of infamously, Dick Cheney was
You shot your best friend.
I know what to say. Did you shoot? Who'd you shoot?
No. In this respect, where he had George W. Bush asked Dick Cheney to put together a committee to recommend who his running mate would be, in the 2000 election. He
Okay.
kind of infamously did that and then recommended himself, and that's how he got selected as.
It's the same approach for the new Jeopardy host, I understand. It's
Oh,
like,
you're right,
I've done the research and I'm the guy. So
Yeah. Well, I
hire
did do
me.
that for the head of this legal program, and so I've been at NTU for about 2 years now.
Congratulations, Joe. And you've spoken in front of Congress about a half dozen times, maybe more. What surprised you about doing that? Like after you've done it, like what are your big takeaways?
Yeah, that it's theater. I think that's something a lot of people don't get about congressional hearings. That if the purpose really was to get illicit information from experts and to debate what the best policy is, you really wouldn't design it as a 45-minute hearing where each person gets 5 minutes to present, and then everybody speaks in turn, and then it's gaveled closed. But that's how congressional hearings operate. I've worked a lot at the state level. I've testified to like 30-something states. So I've kind of seen a whole different array of how different legislatures do things. And by and large, at the state level, the hearings are genuine exchanges of information. Every seat is filled. That's certainly not the case in Congress, where the member of Congress will only be there when the camera is on them asking the question. And once they move on to somebody else, then they leave and they go do something else. So oftentimes when you see these people testifying to Congress, they're speaking to empty chairs.
But it's a great way to get sound bites and raise money.
Yeah, I mean, that's primarily what it's all about. And this is by and large, there's always exceptions. There's always members of Congress that are much more judicious and paying attention. And that's on both sides. It's not even a partisan thing on that. So, for instance, Judy Chu in California, who I think I disagree with on every possible tax policy thing we could come up with. She did not leave the hearing room. She was there for the whole thing. She was genuinely engaging and stuff. So that'll
Thank
be
you,
my
Judy.
good deed for the day, is saying a nice thing about somebody that I'm not a big fan of policy-wise. So.
Well, on that note, Joe, we've done some research and we want to talk about tax the rich.
Yeah.
There's a group based in New York called Patriotic Millionaires. They call the current tax policy a gross unfairness. And in your review of the tax code, Joe, is there any definition of fair share?
That's a very good question. And if anybody is so inclined, I actually wrote a law review article for, that one's for, I think I have to remember, I think that one was for the Harvard Journal on Legislation, really digging in. I wrote it a couple years ago, 8 years ago, I think, on what is fairness in taxation. And because there's a couple different ways you can define it. And oftentimes people will use the definition that gets to their preferred political outcome. But let's pretend that's not what we're doing, and we're trying to be objective about it. It is true that there are rich people in this country who pay very little in tax, and there are poor people that pay a lot in tax. And I would say that's unfair. We've designed a system where the purpose of it, by the designers, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, the purpose of it is the more you make, the more you pay. And if you don't make a lot of money, you're not supposed to be paying a whole lot. And that there are people that don't fit within, there are people that don't fit within that, and that rich people not paying much and poor people paying a lot seems to not match that. And that's primarily a problem with design, where we've and I can give two quick examples of kind of, because you might ask, how does that happen?
Yeah, how does that happen?
So just to give two quick examples from each end of the income scale, if you invest your money in government bonds, the interest is tax-free. And governments do this because they want you to invest in their bonds rather than in silly stuff like in a new company or a new product or anything like that. But if you're a rich person and all your money is in government bonds, well, you're not getting taxed on any of that. And so, and actually, there are a lot of rich people who that's why they don't pay any income taxes, because all their money is in government bonds that they're getting out of it. And then at the other end of the economic scale, we have a lot of social safety net programs, food stamps, Section 8 housing vouchers, and you can kind of go on a lot of them that are out there, but they all have what's known as income phase outs.
Mhm.
So as soon as you start earning X dollars, you lose the benefit. And we did this badly. Each one of these programs has a different income phase out, and there's a great chart I think the Cato Institute does, where they actually put all of it on one chart, so you can see the negative of the deterring effect that these have, because if you're making $0, you're eligible for all these programs.
Mhm.
But if you get a job and a minimum wage job and you start earning $20,000-$30,000 a year, you're actually worse off because you start losing eligibility for a bunch of these programs.
Yeah, it subsidizes non-work. At least that's what a lot of people on the right tend to say.
And then one of these is the earned income tax credit, which has a very aggressive phase out, and it depends on how many kids you have. And that was actually something that Paul Ryan and Barack Obama jointly tried to fix, but were not able to do. So again, some of these cross-partisan lines on how do we fix these problems. So that's an example of why a poor person might be paying a lot, even though they're earning very little.
That's helpful. We've heard a lot about tax the rich. Bernie Sanders, AOC, Elizabeth Warren, lots of celebrities kind of get on board on this. Joe, in your opinion, is this a better fiscal policy or a way to sell dresses?
Well, they're talking about her appearance at the Met Ball, which is you have to be rich to attend.
Yeah, were you there, Joe? Did you get an invite?
I did not go to the Met Ball.
Next year, maybe.
Yeah. You asked about Bernie Sanders. My husband's from Vermont, so we go up there quite a bit.
Nice.
Bernie's the independent senator from Vermont. He has a lake house. He's doing pretty good for himself. After 2016, he sold a few books. He puts his tax returns out, so that information's all out there. He used to say in the 2016 campaign about millionaires and billionaires. And if you pay attention, and I noticed this because I'm a lawyer, so I look at changes on words. And in 2020, he mainly talked about billionaires. Stop talking about
inflation. Yeah.
Well, if you look on his tax, he sold quite a few books, and he became a millionaire. And I don't begrudge him for it. It's an American success story.
Sure.
That you can kind of come up from nothing, which is his story, his narrative, and whatever you might say about Bernie Sanders, and I've got a lot of criticisms of his policies and ideas, but I think people liked him because the man means what he says. He's consistent.
He's genuine.
And genuine, and there's no hidden anything there, and all of that. But he's a millionaire now. And so suddenly the real issue is billionaires, not millionaires and billionaires. And
in a few years, it'll be trillionaires. Those damn trillionaires.
So what is rich and what is poor, and
is it based on the friends we make along the way? Is that
right? I think Tocqueville once said, and this is a line that's always stuck with me, that America, or maybe this is one of those things that he never said, but everyone thinks he said it. I'm not sure, but at least what's attributed to him was America doesn't have any poor people. It only has temporarily inconvenienced millionaires. So really, when we can talk statistics and what's the income threshold to be in the top 1%, which is about $500,000 a year of income for what it's worth, and what is it to be middle class, and that's about $45,000 a year statistically. But I really think it's a state of mind for most people. And the best definition I've come up with, and everyone always wonders whether I'm serious when I say this, and I am, the definition of poor is when like if somebody thinks they're poor, it's a good rule of thumb is a poor person is somebody who can't afford their own car, and a rich person is somebody who can afford their own plane. And everyone else considers themselves middle class.
Interesting.
And this is how I mean, this is kind of what's caused tax policy to be what it is today, because Republicans want to cut taxes and they want to cut taxes for everybody. And as you know, if you cut income taxes, because right now our system is the more you make, the more you pay. Even if you do a flat income tax cut, most of the benefit's going to go to high income people because they're paying most of the taxes.
Right.
Then on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats talk about taxing the rich. But you'll notice the threshold they use seems to be designed to exclude most people that we might consider rich. So Barack Obama, when he was running for president and running for re-election, talked about an income cutoff of, I think, 250,000. President Biden, when he ran for president in 2020, he talked about 400,000. So, I guess that's, but 400,000, that's the top 1%. So you're excluding 99% of income earners when you do that, which is probably the point, because most people, when you poll them and you ask, do you support taxing the rich? They say, yeah. And
sure.
Do you
Sounds good.
support taxing this? Do you support taxing that? A lot of people will say yes. But when you suggest or you propose something that they will pay, people say no. So there was a poll, it was a couple of years ago, I've lost it since, but I always loved it because it illustrated this so aptly. It said, do you support raising taxes to address climate change? And that's like 60%, 70% yes.
Like, do you like clean water?
Yeah. And then but they asked a follow-up question, which was, would you support a tax to address climate change if it resulted in your heating bill going up, and it was some tiny number, it was like $1 a month, or the price of gas going up, and I think it was like 5 cents. And that was, it was 80% no. So you'll find a lot of the tax ideas from the Democrats that make it across the finish line or make it into a legislative proposal are these goofy ones that are somehow only apply to like a handful of people, and that's why they don't raise a lot of money. So Bernie doesn't feel himself so limited. He does want like gigantic taxes that like triple the size of the federal government and raise a lot of money. And so he wanted to do a $6 trillion spending increase. Our whole budget is $6 trillion.
Go big, Bernie, go big. Yeah.
And he's been negotiated down to, it's currently at like 1.5 something is the Democratic proposal, and that may not even pass. And that's the whole, like, what will Manchin accept, what will Sinema accept, drama going on in Washington. And even to raise 1.5 trillion, they've got some really goofy tax things in there, but it's really trying to only apply to a handful of people. This, incidentally, is not how Europe and some of the the welfare state countries do it.
Well, isn't Sweden the beacon of all things wonderful? Can you share a little bit about
universal health care? But they don't pay for it by taxing billionaires. They pay for it with it's like a 15 or 20% national sales tax that everybody pays. That's how they're able to pay for that stuff, because otherwise it doesn't add up. There's no way you can promise to everyone in the country you will get more in benefits from the federal government than you pay in taxes,
right? And
then have it add up when you add it all up. There's just not enough of billionaires. It's only 600 billionaires
in the U.S.
In the United States. And I feel like we should be trying to have more billionaires, not fewer billionaires. But like, even if you just confiscate all of their money, that's only going to pay for a couple of months of the federal budget. We spend a lot of money at the federal level, and we can't pay for it all just by taxing a fraction of 1% of the population.
But can that help us pay for more socially beneficial programs?
Yeah, that's the argument, and honestly, that's what we're already doing. So the top 1%, their average tax rate is 25%, compared to 13% for all taxpayers, the average of all taxpayers. So they're already kind of paying twice what everyone else is, just in percentage terms. In dollar terms, it's a lot more than everyone else is. Maybe that should be more, but you'll notice a lot of these advocates of taxing the rich never say the number they're looking for, never say what they want. Some of them, I guess, say 100%. Okay, they're at least being clear about what they want. But like, already they're paying their fair share and the fair share of several other people. How much do we want to do this?
Mhm. I've seen several posts or articles discussing the 50s when the top marginal tax rate was, I think, 91%. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of going off the top of my head. So,
No, you got it. You're absolutely right.
and people say, like, it's so much lower now. It's been, what it is. So it's reasonable to go to 50 or 60.
Interesting statistic on that is,
Please share.
yeah, the top tax rate was 90%. The average of how much the government collected in revenue compared to all income was essentially the same as it is now.
You are brilliant, Joe. That was my question. How is a percentage of income?
This is counterintuitive, and we still don't even really know a good explanation of why this is. But obviously the top federal tax rate has gone up and down over the last century. Went up in World War I and down in the Harding Coolidge years, and then up under FDR, and then down starting under Kennedy, and then through Reagan, and then it's been up a little bit since Obama, and Biden wants to notch it up a little bit more. But even through all these roller coaster ups and downs, the amount of money the federal government collects from income taxes compared to the overall economy is pretty much a straight line.
And what do you think contributes to that?
So there's a lot of theories. The one I like most is, this theory, this is just the resilience of the American people. I guess that's true. But part of it is there's two dials when it comes to tax policy. There's rate and there's base. Rate is what we've been talking about.
Right.
But base matters too. Base is what is taxed. And, if you kind of see this play out, if you read the books Robert Caro has written about LBJ, it's like three or four volumes, these huge things about, all of these horrible stories about LBJ being terrible to people and awful to people. But it's quite a page turner. He's a very gifted writer. But, tax policy came up then, and what they would do is, they double the tax on some industry or on some tax, and then hand out credits and deductions to their favored businesses within that industry.
Exemptions.
Right. So, and this is how it plays out. So, yeah, the tax rate was 90%, but you could deduct all interest back then under the income tax, and all of your state taxes were deductible under the income tax back then. And if you invested in this thing that the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee really liked, then you got all your taxes waived on that too. And it was kind of all this stuff. And when they did the big 1986 reform, which lowered the rate and broadened the base, it kind of worked in reverse, where the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee got everybody in a room and said, look, if the rate is half what it is, which is what they were able to do, would you be able to live without your special interest deduction or exemption? And I mean, everybody said no because they wanted it, but he listened to them and he just rammed it through. And but when the rate's lower, it reduces the pressure. If you're paying 25%, you're less worried about your deductions than if you're paying 50 or 60 or 90%. Sure. And everything has a lobby in this town, and people know how to call their congressman and write their congressman, which by far is much more effective than people give it credit for, by the way.
Is it?
If you're not writing, I live in DC, I don't have a senator, but if you're not writing your senator on everything that you have an opinion about, you're leaving options on the table there.
Is it more effective than posting angry messages on social media?
Yes.
Wow. Well, there's something I need to get off my chest, Joe, and it involves.
Let me tell you why. Just to finish,
please.
So when you call, that's logged. Every office logs the call, and they, every office kind of assumes that every person calling to complain about something represents a certain number of people. So every person that called, that's really 100 people that are upset about this issue. Social media, I don't think they pay attention to that at all, but and I've done this where if you get 5 or 6 people to call in on an issue, and the more esoteric the issue, the more impactful this is.
Sure.
Some of these members of Congress or senators will think, "Oh my God, we're missing out on this horrible thing that we need to get in front of." So it's very powerful.
Interesting. Well, I need to vent a little bit because our co-host Eric, he's going to Florida. He's young. He's in really good shape. His abs are probably way better than mine because he goes to the gym and he's not as middle aged as I am. What if, say, you, Joe, me, and everyone else in the country votes and we say, I want to take 80% of Eric's net worth? Is that democracy?
Joke's
in your
on you.
opinion? Yeah. And your parents. Yeah.
Well, hopefully he doesn't have student loans. It might be a negative net worth. Try to do that. So, there's a moral question there, and that's really up for every person to decide under their moral thing. I mean, at what point does tax policy become confiscation and theft and something that's immoral? So, if
well, what about the populist idea of all these people want this, and we're going to get it from a very small minority of people? In this case, it's a one-person thing, but I mean, we could expand.
So, I think that's pretty reprehensible, but I mean, that comes down to people's moral code. There's the economic argument of our system functions. The money government spends has to be earned first by somebody, and we have all these discussions about distribution and spending, and what's the right thing to spend on, that we sometimes forget production is the other side of that equation. So the greatest thing about the free market is that the reason America is number one in innovation and number one in all the amazing things we've been able to produce, and all the energy saving things, all the consumer goods that are out there, is because we've developed a system to encourage that. And if we start saying that we're going to take 80-90% of everything everybody makes, well, Eric might want to spend more time on the golf course in Florida rather than being productive, producing stuff, and
Interesting.
Enjoy the fruits of his labors. And this isn't just theoretical. We've seen this in other countries over the years that moved to systems like this, where everybody's gonna work what they can work, and then we're gonna all evenly split the proceeds. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. We've tried, like 30 countries tried this experiment in the last 100 years, and the result was always the same: misery, poverty, a deficient standard of living, and it might be more equality, but equality in poverty. Which is not to say that there aren't improvements and adjustments that we can make to our free market system, but if you're just talking about what produces better outcomes, longer life expectancy, higher standards of living, greater opportunities, it's America.
USA. In anticipation of you joining us, Joe, I watched some Vox pieces because I do my homework, and on it, they discussed Elizabeth Warren's proposed wealth tax, and I'll simplify it, but it would be levied on the top 0.05% of folks based on net worth. I understand, not income. And supporters say it would pay for public college, food stamps, other social benefits. What do you say, Joe?
Well, it doesn't add up. It's funny math in that being able to, those programs cost trillions of dollars, and you just can't grab it from that small of a revenue source. It's going to raise something. I acknowledge that, but it's not going to raise near enough to provide these universal benefits for everybody. As I said, the European welfare states, they're able to provide cradle to grave services by taxing everybody, because otherwise you just can't raise the revenue. And that's even before you bring in income effects of that. Now, and then there's criticism specific to the tax as she's designed it. And I've read through her bill, I've talked to experts, and I've read analysis of it. And you're going to get a lot of evasion from that tax, even at that rate that she set it at. And this happened in France, where they imposed a wealth tax, and they had to exempt a few things that are hard to estimate. Because I mean that's an issue in designing a wealth tax. You know, if you tax people's homes, okay, there's comparable sales and property tax records, so you can kind of get an estimate of what those cost. And then there's like stocks and bonds, which are traded, and they have daily quote rates, and you can kind of get that. But everything else is kind of a guesstimate.
Sure.
And so you can either have these assessors constantly out there trying to guesstimate the value of things, and then everybody disputing the assessments. And you'll have situations like the Michael Jackson estate thing, which the IRS dragged out for a decade after his death, because the estate was like, Michael Jackson's endorsement is worthless. And the IRS said, no, it's worth $1 billion. And I mean, that's a big gulf. And it took a decade of litigation to resolve that actually it is worthless. Nobody wants Michael Jackson's endorsement for their products anymore. The IRS held out for $1 billion for a long time on that. And so France tried this, and so they decided to exempt all the hard to value stuff. Well, guess what? Everybody put all their assets into
the hard to value stuff, the illiquid securities.
All the rich people in France sold all their stocks and bonds and bought artwork. And so it like devastated the ability of businesses to raise money for new investments. And then it didn't raise a whole lot of revenue, and it made everybody was trying to be a tax cheat, which you don't want your tax system to encourage people to do. So they repealed it pretty quickly because it was having all of those devastating effects. Elizabeth Warren's proposal is basically identical to that, and it's going to have all of those same problems. But
is it a great way to get votes?
Well, she didn't win the nomination, so I don't even know if that's true.
Oh, fair enough.
And, I don't really know what it takes to get votes nowadays. People like
free stuff. I think
people like free stuff. People like genuineness. And I think, the moment she kind of, her star kind of got a little tarnished was when she dialed back on her healthcare proposal.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know. I think people appreciated that she was like not playing the Washington game, and then that kind of made it seem like she was playing the Washington game. I think she lost some votes after that.
Okay. You touched on property tax, at least in America. That's kind of an example of a wealth tax.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you could help
also really unpopular.
Yeah. It's one of the few California taxes that's comparatively lower than some other states. I mean, on the aggregate,
maybe the gas tax, it's the most unpopular tax.
It's the most interesting. So in simple terms, like two people can make, say, $45,000 a year for 10 years. And then have widely different net worths at the end of those 10 years, because I might be a spendthrift and Eric might, stock it away in savings bonds and live more conservatively. What's the rationale between taxing Eric more because he saved prudently over those 10 years versus me that was just out looking for coke and whores?
So the theory is that, as a property owner, you're benefiting from the services government provides, fire protection and police and
garbage.
And luckily, those are, that can be said to be in proportion to the value of the property that you own. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to chip in for that. And schools is another one. A lot of schools are paid for out of property tax. This is what's known as the benefit principle of taxation, the idea that the people paying taxes should be the same people benefiting from the services that those taxes are paying for. So that's kind of where it comes from. Where I think the property taxes, it has its idiosyncrasies where you have retired people who are earning no income but still have to pay a full property tax, and your property might go up and down just based on the market and not independent of anything that you might have done to improve or ruin your property. And then fighting assessors who are always disputing what the assessment is about. but even I don't think that's why the property tax is unpopular. I think it's unpopular because it's real money that everyone has to pay. I mean, most people have their property tax paid for out of their mortgage, so maybe they don't even really see how much it is every year, but it's considerable.
Sure.
Depending on how big your property is. But I mean, even for a relatively small property value, it's a lot of money every year, and it 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 just goes to show that like taxes that people pay are unpopular.
Taxes that
And
other people pay are very popular.
right, and I mean that's ultimately what it comes down to, and you see this playing out in tax policy debates as we've been talking about.
Well, there's one policy that's being floated in California, and I'm sure there's similar ones in other states, Joseph, where it's essentially a revenue tax on businesses, or they call it gross income. But is there a precedent for that? Like it's something in California where it's like 2% of revenue. So one company could have a service model and another could have a really high cost of goods. And so their net incomes can be hugely different, but
Yeah.
they might have the same initial tax hit. Is this precedented? Like, could this actually happen?
Yeah, and they're terrible ideas. So most business taxes are taxes on profits.
Mm-hmm.
So you collect all your revenue, you subtract your expenses like stuff you've bought and new equipment and wages you've paid, and then you get a number that's your profit, and then the tax is on the profit. So if there's a 25% corporate income tax, it'll only be paid on the 25% of the profit after revenues and expenses. The idea that has popped up, and there are some historical examples which I'll talk about, and they're all devastating. But we don't learn from history in this country, I guess. Is well, rather than applying it to profit, let's just apply it on the top to revenue. And historically, they're called gross receipts.
Yeah, it's harder to get out of. There's less shenanigans.
It is harder to get out of. But the main negative, and it's simpler in that you don't have to do all this calculation. You just you bring in money and you pay the tax on it, and the rate can be a lot lower and still raise a lot of revenue. The downside is it's an economic time bomb. It destroys your economy because of the example that you gave, where different companies have widely different margins on each dollar of revenue. So take a very successcul company that everyone hates right now. I don't know, like Facebook or
Meta, I think, yeah.
Or Blackwater, or something like that.
Or Pfizer with their vaccine that's helping save lives. They're evil.
So for them, they earn a lot of profits. Revenue is still higher than profits, but like a really successful company is going to earn like 20-30 cents in profit on every dollar of sales.
Right.
That's not most companies. Most companies are barely getting by once you subtract out expenses. Certainly all of your restaurants, all your grocery stores. I think the average grocery store margin is 2%.
I didn't know it was that high. I thought it was low, but yeah.
It's, every $100 you bring in, 98 cents, every dollar you bring in, 98 cents is going out in wages and to purchase wholesale purchases of what you're selling and all your expenses and all of that. So you put a 2.5% tax, gross receipts tax on a grocery store, they're out of business. It's more than their margin, more than their net. Probably wouldn't be devastating to some of those other high margin businesses, where what gets them is the other horrible feature of gross receipts taxes is the pyramiding. Because if you impose this tax on every company, you're going to get an end result tax that's much higher. Let me give an example. So most products that are made are not like just made by somebody and then sold by somebody. A lot of them have a lot of these intermediate steps of additional components being added, or a wholesale, or a dealer gets involved, or maybe there's some marketing associated with it. But I think on average, it's like the average thing you buy now has like 7 intermediate steps in it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certainly some that have a lot more and some that have less. If you have one of these gross receipts taxes, that's a tax at whatever the tax rate is at every level of that production. So, if you buy a pillow on Etsy, handmade by somebody, maybe that only gets the tax applied once.
Mhm.
If you buy an iPhone, God knows how many different companies are making things going into an iPhone. That tax is probably going to apply 7, 8, 9, 10 times. And there's a study that I didn't do, one of my colleagues did about 20 years ago, trying to figure out kind of by product and by industry the levels of it's called pyramiding of the taxes on taxes that apply, and it's really just random because it's entirely based on the type of industry. Now, some countries have done this. Usually, like second world and third world countries have tried this tax.
Like California, is that an example?
California has not tried it yet, but
Okay.
they're looking to it, I guess. And the net result is that it totally warps the economy because there's this incentive for every business to be vertically integrated, to have everything within
Sure.
one business, which is kind of the opposite of what we're trying to do with like antitrust law and all that stuff. But anyway, and it wipes out low margin businesses. So if like you're a successful business, yeah, you'll survive. You're not going to be happy about paying the tax, but you'll make it. But like every one of those struggling businesses that just absolutely, or businesses that pay out everything in wages and expenses and keep very little at the end of the day, it just wipes them out. So it's a really bad idea. Every public finance scholar, whatever their political view, considers these to be the worst form of taxation. But unfortunately, we keep wanting to learn this lesson through real life experiments rather than just accepting it to be true.
We like to touch the hot stove, Joe.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be wrapping
I did that
up.
as a kid. I touched it.
I did this morning. I actually singed my arm hair, but that's a different story. It doesn't smell too nice. We'll be wrapping up soon, but you hear a lot of this discussion and very well meaning, and we all want more equality. I think most of us would. We don't like this idea of these haves and have-nots. And I've heard this saying, like, in order for the rich keep getting richer and the poor in America are getting poorer. What is your take on that, Joe?
Well, again, it comes down to definitions. Globally, we're all rich, everyone in this country. The average GDP in Mississippi is higher than the average GDP in Great Britain.
Wow.
And, most people don't travel a lot. I've only been to Britain a couple of times, but you kind of see this. It's like the cars are a little smaller, the apartments are a little smaller. Maybe they don't have central air conditioning. They're not unhappy. They don't live in poverty, most people in other countries, but the standard of living is kind of like what it was in the United States 20 or 30 years ago, statistically. And you kind of see it in some of these examples. People like to play with the statistics in the United States where, your average income adjusted for inflation since 1970 has been kind of flat. And, is that about innovation? Is that about cutting tax rates? Is that about economic growth? And there's a whole lot of plausible explanations out there about why that is. An important thing to note is dollar income is not everything. There are some things that can't be matched by that. The TV I have now is a whole lot better than the TV that I had when I was a kid in the 1980s. This magical device that I have, that we all have, that we can't live without. I don't know. The richest billionaire in 1960 or 1970 could not have all of these capabilities. And I think
right, yeah, Bill Gates did not have that in 1995.
Like, I think Professor Donna Boudreau put this to me once. It's like, in 1960, President Lyndon Johnson had a TV with like all three networks on in the Oval Office. And if he wanted to overnight mail something, like he could get the military to, you give the letter to the military and they'd run a jet and be able to deliver it overnight. But other than him, probably nobody else on the planet could do that. Now all of us can. It's not cheap, but it's a hell of a lot cheaper than running a military jet overnight. So there's all these things that are out there where the standard of living is a whole lot better than it was in the 1970s, and that's available to everybody. And if you ask an elderly person who's, lived through 70, 80, 90 years, they'll talk about healthcare and how, healthcare in the 1950s and 1960s was not a lot more advanced than like, we'll put you in a bed and maybe hook fluids to you and hopefully you'll get better. Whereas today we have what I can really only consider nothing short of miraculous in some of the treatments and that they have out there. And I sometimes think about, because I'm a morbid person, how many times over would I be dead if I lived in caveman days, or if I lived in the Middle Ages or something, just from the medical interventions that when I had to have my wisdom teeth taken out,
Sure.
and when I had to have my gallbladder taken out, and when I had this infection or that infection. Those were death sentences, and now we can cure them with a pill. Sometimes it's not a cheap pill.
Nope. It has very high margins on some of those pills.
Right. So, this like, oh, woe is me, everything's getting better, worse all the time. People say that. I don't know how much they actually believe it. There's no time in history I'd rather be living than right now, right here.
Well, I can't think of a better way to conclude this. Joe, I hope you and your husband are invited to Bernie Sanders' lake house. I think he owes it to you. But thank you so much. I'd love to have you back again if you're so generous as to be our guest. But where can folks out there learn more about you and some of the work you're doing?
Sure. Check us out at National Taxpayers Union, which is NTU.org. And then certainly send us a note if you've encountered any horrible situations with your tax collector, or either your federal tax or your state tax. That we want to hear about that, because we're working to make things better and take on the IRS. So I've got about 20 lawsuits we're juggling right now. We're hoping to win all of them and get some good permanent law for taxpayers in the future.
Well, give him hell. And thank you so much for joining us, Joe.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Eric.